Okay, so if you're looking at the screen, you can see Roosevelt, and hopefully you run into Roosevelt on this course. Roosevelt just had it, charisma in spades. This is a great picture of him. Of course, he had polio and he couldn't walk. What he would do is he had very stiff braces, and he would walk between like his son and maybe a security guard, and or he would stand between them, and he would kind of shuffle walk. But basically, he was confined to a wheelchair after the early 1920s because he contracted polio. And the American press, very different world than we live in today, didn't really report on Roosevelt's the fact that he couldn't walk. I asked my mom, I said, do you guys really not know Roosevelt couldn't walk? And I don't know, it seemed like the nation just decided they didn't care. But anyway, but he was brilliant, manipulative, shrewd. Um, to me, he's up there with him in Washington. And he was a fantastic wartime leader, and I'll develop this over the course of the semester. He was a master strategist. He was the one that was really pushing U.S. foreign policy. And like I said before, he understood U.S. government because he worked in government for so long. He knew the pressure points. He understood the Navy very well. He was a sailor. He was one of these rich folks that sailed the economy when he was a kid. He was very, very self-confident. So he is a dominating leader in World War II. And during World War II, the U.S. Takes over from England as the dominant power in the Western world. So, as I said before, in 1940, Roosevelt decides he needs to run for a third term. It was very controversial because everyone up until FDR had stepped down after two terms. And there was a lot of opposition to this. A lot of Americans, they didn't like Roosevelt. U.S. politics was split in. A lot of people hated New Deal policies. They didn't. Some folks just thought, hey, we don't elect dictators in the U.S., so no third term. But what's happening is that the war in Europe is not going well. Poland's captured in 1930, early 1940. France falls to Germany. Then Western Europe falls to Germany. And it just seems like it's a domino effect. So you still have opposition to the war in Europe. The Congress, with Roosevelt's prodding, starts moving. The U.S., I think, had the 19th largest army in the world in 1940. That is something along those lines. And we had demilitarized ourselves after World War One. So you had $1 billion defense bill that was passed in May of 1940 as Hitler is on the verge of invading the Soviet Union. So the Congress is starting to rebuild the army. It's starting to rebuild the Navy. It's just seen as prudent to do so. The Selective Service Act, the draft, which I guess you folks that are younger, you have to register for the draft, but it's probably something you don't really think about. It was reinstituted. It had been unplugged after World War One, but it was reinstituted. And it was a peacetime draft. And the peacetime draft, it only passed by one vote. So that's how tight it was in Congress. The idea to rebuild the army to make it a genuine world power army barely passed in 1940 because there was such strong isolationist feeling. And that's always seen as a real mark of the anti-war feeling in the United States during this period. Roosevelt ran against a Republican, you would have to remember this, his name is Wendell Willkie, who actually wasn't an isolationist. He actually, kind of like Roosevelt, was worried about Germany. But what Roosevelt does, and I'll play this in class on when I see you all, I guess it's a week from Monday, I'm going to this on Sunday, Labor Day weekend. Roosevelt in October of 1940, he goes on the radio and he says, "No American boys will die on European soil while I'm president." Which he was lying. He knew that there was going to be a war, and he was doing everything behind the scenes to push for a war with Hitler. But he had to say the words. This is what the American people wanted to hear. They wanted to hear him say that no American boys would ever fight in Europe again, or certainly not while he was president. So he does what he has to do. He says the words, even though he knows the words aren't true. And that behind the scenes, he's doing everything he can to make sure that the United States allies with Great Britain against Hitler. So it's kind of an interesting moral question. You know, he lied, but then again, Hitler's bad news. And thank God in my opinion, we got the war against him. But it just shows the complexities of the era. So he defeats Wilkie. He doesn't get the electoral vote that he got before, but he wins. I'm sorry, he doesn't get as much popular vote, but he wins the electoral vote pretty easily. And then he does something which is very interesting. So, like in December, he's trying to figure out, okay, now I'm elected. Now I've got 4 years, right? What can I do to help England? And one of the things he did was he traded 50 destroyers to England for British naval bases in the Caribbean. So he was able to supply, and England needed those destroyers to help with the merchandise it was shipping over from the U.S. England could ship guns and munitions from the U.S. to England, but they had to pay cash for those goods, and they had to carry it on their own ships. And the German submarines were very, very effective. And then they were decimating the merchant marines of the British. So anyway, so Roosevelt trades. So it's kind of cash and carry. The U.S. gets naval bases that the British and the British get destroyers. But Roosevelt decides that he needs to move beyond that. And I'll talk about that in the next podcast.